Day Monday to everyone out there. Hope everyone's having a safe and happy holiday. Welcome to the Sports Note. And yesterday we had the 107th running of the Indianapolis 500. And anyone who knows me, and it's also been well documented on the Wise Guys show, that this is the one sporting event that I do not miss every year. So there will essentially be some form of recap going forward every year as long as I'm doing the Sports Note. But congratulations to 32-year-old Nashville native Joseph Newgarden for winning the Indy 500 yesterday in his 12th try. Albeit it was and not to take anything away from Newgarden whatsoever, this was a highly controversial finish, but it's one that was probably the right call to make. We saw a pretty clean race for the first half, and it was very well on its way to being the fastest Indy 500 in modern history. They were actually looking at sub 2.5 hours for the entire race. The green flag dropped right about 12:45. And pole sitter Alex Palou seemed to actually have quite a bit of command early on, and then ended up giving up the lead, and then it was back and forth between teammates Marcus Ericsson and Pato O'Ward for a good chunk of the middle part of that race. I can actually remember just the two of them, Ericsson and O'Ward, going back and forth every 2 or 3 laps, swapping the lead to conserve fuel, because teams were already strategizing not even 75 laps into the race, with still over 120 laps to go, that we're not going to make it on fuel. You've got to actually you've got to conserve the tires. They showed in the pits that I believe it was Marcus Ericsson's tires, or it might have been Newgarden's tires, where the entire side rim of the tire was starting to splinter and blister. And they say you can't burn up the tires like this, but as long as they were out in front, they didn't actually care. Lead laps, earn points for the NTT Championship, and in the end, we saw, whereas the race was again well on its way to being sub 2.5 hours, and then chaos ensued. We had 4, 5 crashes, 3 of them in the last 15 laps, and the race got black flagged 3 times. I'm sorry, not black flag, red flag 3 times. And one of the two biggest losers to come out of yesterday was Ericsson first and foremost, but Ericsson had the lead going into the final restart, where O'Ward actually hit the wall after making contact with Ericsson, ironically enough, and then beat to the line when the caution came out in that crash, and was actually declared the race leader. Ericsson was hoping, because now there were 2 laps remaining, that the race would have finished under caution and he would have won back-to-back Indy 500s. And the aspect of that is that, had Ericsson won yesterday's race, there's a roll. The best way I could put it is a rolling jackpot. If you win the Indy 500 2 years in a row, there's an extra bonus that's added onto your first place purse. And since Elio Castroneves was the last person to win back-to-back 500s in '01 and '02, that jackpot now essentially was up to $420,000. So huge incentive for Newgarden, to overtake Ericsson, to deny that, because if Ericsson, if Newgarden was going to win it, then Ericsson was going to be the only one entitled to that. He was going to make sure that he definitely was not going to see that money, and not that there was any kind of rivalry between the two or anything, but it was Ericsson almost immediately, and his team taking umbrage with the fact that they red flagged and then essentially got going and had a one lap sprint to the finish. And because a lot of the times in IndyCar races there are not overtimes like there are in NASCAR, and Newgarden ended up getting him on the back stretch and then took the last two turns, basically dipping just about below the commitment line in the pits to be able to block Ericsson to the bricks at the start finish line. Um, and Ericsson in the post race interview immediately started crying foul, sour grapes. It was eerily reminiscent of any Formula One fans out there. Remember the ending to the Abu Dhabi race, which was the series finale of the 2021 season, and Lewis Hamilton led Max Verstappen by mere points with just a couple of laps remaining in the entire race, and then what they call a safety car had come out, which is there's on track cautions, and then there's safety cars, which is essentially the pace car coming out with the Grand Prix style of Formula One. And Verstappen was sitting in fifth and needed to essentially win to overtake Hamilton to win the season championship. There were three other cars in between them, naturally, and Verstappen was actually given a free pass to move up to second, to where Hamilton and Verstappen were going to have a one lap shootout slash sprint for the championship. And Hamilton immediately, his team was crying foul the minute the call was made to give Verstappen the pass up to second. And ironically enough, the head of Formula One who made that call was no longer in his position after the end of the season, but there was nothing more that they could do. And his explanation on the radio to Hamilton's pit crew chief was, it's an entertainment business. We want to actually decide this on the track, which was was it the right move under the rule book? No, but you got to give the people what they want. To quote Excalibur talking about the best friends in AEW, which great show last night, and I might talk about that a little later on this week. But to be able to red flag the race, and even Danica Patrick, who only had one victory on the IndyCar tour in her career, at Twin Motegi in Japan. I want to say it was 2003. Don't quote me on the year, but I do remember it was Twin Motegi. Even said that that's not something we typically do, to go red flag, warm up, and then one lap sprint to the finish. Because again, there is no overtime in IndyCar. A lot of these guys were basically sucking air on fuel. A lot of them were on tires that had already run 30-35 laps. And then again, Newgarden made the pass and crossed the finish line as the winner. But as much as Marcus Ericsson's going to cry foul about what happened to him, I think if anyone has a right to cry sour grapes, it was pole sitter Alex Palou. Now Palou on midway through the race, naturally, as the pole sitter, gets the first pit box at the end of pit lane. Now, the only problem with that is that he's got to come all the way down at 65 miles an hour when they've actually been running 212, 213, 214 for 30, for 25, 30, 33 laps typically before with pit strategies and everything. And just a little bit behind him was Rinus VeeKay. Now, VeeKay had actually spun the tires getting out of his pit box, which actually in turn turned his car around in pit lane, made contact with Palou, and ended up shoving Palou into the wall. Palou actually had to come back in on the very next lap for a front wing replacement after there was damage to the left front. Thankfully, there was no damage to the chassis, to the tires, the arms, everything of that nature. But it was it was definitely something that it ended up sending Pelot, who was running in the top five at the time, all the way back to 28th. And Pelot ended up finishing fifth. And had there been a couple of more laps under green as opposed to those red flag stops where it took a couple of laps to warm everything up, there's a possibility Pelot could have gotten back to the front and won this, as could American Alexander Rossi, a former champion himself, who had a very, very good, consistent run most of the day, ended up finishing fifth. But the some of the crashes were just downright scary. There was one crash as I go to pull this up here, very very briefly. There was one crash with about 12 to 15 laps to go. It was on lap 185, and Kyle Kirkwood made contact with Felix Rosenquist going into turn two. What ended up happening is Kirkwood ended up upside down, and his car was kind of at a 45-degree angle where the majority of the car was on the safer barrier, but the cockpit was scraping across the track, completely upside down, and you could actually see when they showed replays later the onboard camera with Kirkwood's car was at the cockpit, but then it actually gotten turned around in the impact, so where it was literally showing hitting him right in the face. And Kirkwood had already put the visor up, and you can actually see the sparks from the car dragging across the ground. And thankfully with NASCAR, the fact that they have now the canopies used to go to eye level, now they're completely up and over. So had that been here, a lot of those sparks probably would have ended up burning the mask, possibly getting through the mask. In addition to any potential debris, possibly damaging the visor when it flipped up. But Kirkwood had been able to flip up the visor. Thankfully, none of the sparks ended up hitting him in the face. But the other aspect is his back left tire completely snapped off the car and literally flew over the wall and over the safety netting towards the crowd. And it's some sort of force of nature, act of God, whatever you want to call it, that this tire, with the rim and everything still on, probably a good 60 pounds, ended up finding a gap between one of the spotter towers and two sections of grandstands, and ended up hitting a car in the parking lot in there. Because if this would have actually landed in the seats, we could have actually been talking about severe injuries, if not a potential fatalities, coming in at that rate of speed. But I've never, as long as I've been watching open wheel racing, especially Indy, I've never seen a scenario where anything other than a couple of stray pieces of debris from the car on a wreck ends up flying into the crowd. I mean, for a full tire, again, a 60-pound tire, to get that airborne and fly this far, this tire probably flew about the length of a football field, if not more. I'm still trying to get information as to exactly how far this thing traveled, but that was extremely scary, and I'm glad that everyone came out of this okay. But Newgarden also did something very cool to honor, to kind of also honor his teammate Elio Castroneves, the four-time champion. Whereas Elio's atypical celebration, his signature celebration, would be to climb the fence and celebrate in front of the fans with a fist pump. Newgarden actually found a space in the fence that he was able to crawl underneath. For track officials to kind of like be able to get down, underneath, coming from the infield, get up to the Grand Marshal's tower, etc. And actually ended up running into the fans, and also went up 10 or 15 rows worth of stands and started celebrating with the fans, and indicated after the race, he said, that's all I thought about, is if I ever won Indy, I want to celebrate with the people. So that is something I've never seen before, and that was very very cool. And immediately came down and ended up celebrating with his crew, with his wife, who they've been married since 2019. And remember, Newgarden's also a two-time champion on the Indycar circuit. Indy's the one thing really left on his career that's eluded him. His wife Ashley gave birth to their first child back in November, and then as as Pillow reflected back, and Santino Bellucci, I believe his name was, the 24-year-old American from Connecticut, finished third and actually had the lead going in just before going one of those three red flags on the final 15 laps. He will definitely be back. He could be one of the next big young guns on the IndyCar series. And as they were all reflecting, here's Newgarden sipping the whole milk on in victory lane. So, did anyone else catch the race? What did you think? Does Ericsson have a gripe here? Is it sour grapes more than anything? But let me know what you guys think heading into their race next week in Detroit, and I will be back with you guys here a little later on this week. The Wise Guys, will be back in our normal time slot this coming Thursday night. We hope to see you guys very, very soon. Take care, and again, everyone have a great holiday.